Marco DeLuca grabbed the caregiver by her collar in front of his entire staff and threw her personnel file onto the floor like garbage. "Who hired this nobody?" he said coldly. "She looks like she wandered in off the street." Nobody answered. Nobody dared. Lena Carter stood very still, eyes down, hands clasped, and said nothing. That silence, that stillness, it would one day bring the most feared man in Chicago to his knees, sobbing in the rain, begging a dying woman to stay alive. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. She had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive inside a house full of wolves was to stop looking like prey. Lena Carter did not wear bright colors. She did not wear perfume. She did not speak unless spoken to, did not laugh too loudly, did not linger in doorways. She moved through the DeLuca penthouse the way air moves through a room present necessary and completely unnoticed. That was the goal. That was the strategy. That was survival. The DeLuca penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of one of Chicago's most expensive high-rises, and it was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel small the moment they stepped off the elevator. Marble floors so polished you could see your own reflection staring back up at you like a warning. Ceilings that stretched so high above your head that the light fixtures looked like distant stars. Artwork on the walls that cost more than most people earned in a decade. And guards, always guards, standing at corners near doorways beside windows, their eyes constantly moving their hands never far from the weapons holstered beneath their jackets. Lena had been working here for 11 months, 2 weeks and 4 days. She knew this because she counted. Every morning when she woke up at 5:30 in the small spare room she'd been assigned near the service entrance, she counted another day. Not out of gratitude, not out of resentment, simply because counting gave her something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Her job officially was to care for Isabella DeLuca. Isabella was 71 years old, the widow of the man who had built the DeLuca criminal empire from the ground up and the mother of Marco DeLuca, who had then taken that empire and turned it into something that made the original look modest. Isabella was also slowly and stubbornly, and with considerable fury, losing her health. Her heart was weak, her lungs filled with fluid some mornings. Her hands trembled when she tried to lift her coffee cup, and she hated it with a passion that reminded Lena oddly of someone who has never in their life accepted defeat and cannot understand why their own body would dare to betray them now. Lena administered her medications. Lena monitored her blood pressure. Lena helped her to and from the bathroom on the bad days, and on the good days, stepped back far enough that Isabella could pretend she didn't need help at all. Lena read to her from the Italian novels she loved. She brought her soup when the kitchen staff forgot. She sat beside her in silence on the evenings when Isabella simply stared out at the Chicago skyline and breathed very carefully, as if even breathing required negotiation. "You are very quiet," Isabella had said to Lena once, about 3 months into the job, studying her with dark, sharp eyes that hadn't lost any of their shrewdness, even as the rest of her was fading. "Most people who work here talk too much. They're nervous. They want me to like them." Lena had considered this. "I'm not nervous," she said honestly. "No," Isabella agreed slowly. "You're not. What are you then?" Lena thought about her brother Danny in the rehabilitation facility on the south side of the city. She thought about the medical bills stacked in the drawer of her nightstand back in her apartment, her real apartment, the one she paid for, with the money she wasn't spending on food or clothing or anything that might qualify as a life. She thought about the numbers she checked on her phone every payday, the running total that never seemed to go down fast enough no matter how many hours she worked. "Focused," she said finally. Isabella had looked at her for a long moment. Then she'd made a small sound that might have been approval and turned back to her window. That was as close as Lena got to a compliment in this household. From Marco DeLuca, she got nothing at all. She had been introduced to him on her first day by the head of household security, a thick-necked man named Caruso, who treated the introduction the way you might introduce someone to a piece of furniture they were expected to keep clean. Marco had looked at her, truly looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds, and then looked away. Not dismissively exactly. More the way a man who has too many important things in his head looks at something that is registered as not important and files it immediately into a category that doesn't require further thought. She was staff, she was functional, she was invisible. That suited Lena perfectly. Except that Marco DeLuca was very difficult to ignore, even when you were actively trying to. He was 38 years old, tall enough that he had to angle himself slightly coming through doorways, and built like someone who had spent a great deal of time in situations where being strong was the difference between living and dying, which, given who he was probably accurate. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and the kind of face that would have been handsome under different circumstances. Clean lines, strong jaw, the sort of features that could have belonged to an architect or a surgeon or a professor of something serious. Instead, they belonged to the man who controlled the criminal underworld of Chicago, who had territory from the North Lakefront down through the South Side and out into the suburbs, who had arrangements with politicians and judges and police commissioners whose names appeared regularly in the news, alongside words like integrity and public service. He did not smile often. He did not raise his voice often, which Lena found in its own way more frightening than if he had. She had seen him speak very quietly to a man who had apparently failed to follow instructions, and whatever Marco said in those few measured sentences had turned the other man's face a color Lena had never seen on a human being before. He ran his empire from the penthouse like a general. Men came and went at all hours. Conversations happened behind closed doors in low, controlled voices. Occasionally, Lena would be moving through the hallway with a tray of medication or a fresh set of linens, and she would pass close enough to Marco's office to catch a word or a phrase, numbers, names, locations, quantities, and she learned very quickly to unhear these things immediately. That was another survival skill. What you didn't know couldn't get you killed. For 11 months, she had navigated this balance perfectly. Then came the morning Marco DeLuca threw her personnel file on the floor. It happened in the main foyer 2 days before everything fell apart. Lena had been crossing from the kitchen corridor toward Isabella's wing, carrying a small tray with the morning medications, when she heard Marco's voice behind her, not raised, never raised, but carrying that particular edge it had when something had genuinely irritated him. "Who authorized another hire without my approval?" Caruso's voice behind her, slightly anxious. "Sir? She's been here almost a year. She's the one who cares for your mother." "I know what she does. I'm asking who authorized it. Pull her file." Lena kept walking. She did not turn around. She did not pause. She had almost reached the door to Isabella's hallway when she heard the slap of papers hitting marble, and Marco's voice again, still controlled, still cold. "Look at this. No references I recognize, no family in the city, no connections to anyone I know. Somebody explain to me why we have a complete unknown living 40 feet from my mother's bedroom." She was through the door now. She let it close softly behind her. She stood in the hallway for exactly 5 seconds, breathing steadily, and then she continued to Isabella's room. Isabella was awake, sitting up against her pillows, looking at Lena with that sharp-eyed attention she brought to everything. "You look tense," Isabella said. "I'm fine," Lena said, setting down the tray. "Marco said something. He was asking about staff credentials. It's not unusual." Isabella made that small sound again, the one that was somewhere between amusement and something harder to read. "My son," she said, "has the instincts of a man who has survived this long because he trusts nothing and no one." She paused. "Don't take it personally." "I don't," Lena said. And the strange thing was, she meant it. She genuinely didn't. Marco's suspicion wasn't personal. It was professional. It was survival, and she understood survival better than almost anything. What bothered her wasn't being suspected. What bothered her was the conversation she overheard 3 hours later. She wasn't supposed to hear it. She was in the small anteroom adjacent to the main sitting room, changing out a broken lamp that the household manager had asked her to deal with, and the voices came through the wall with a clarity that suggested the architects of the penthouse had not prioritized soundproofing in that particular spot. 2 of Marco's men. She didn't know their names. She made it a policy not to learn names, but she recognized their voices from the hallway. "The Vasquez crew hit 2 of our warehouses last night, south side. Boss, no. He's been briefed, but that's not the part that's got Caruso sweating." A pause, the sound of something being set down. Word is they're not after territory. They're after the family. The other voice quieter. Isabella. That's the word. Lena stopped moving. She stood very still beside the lamp she was supposed to be fixing, and she listened to the rest of it. The Vasquez organization, a rival operation out of the west side that had been testing DeLuca territory for the better part of a year, had apparently decided that the most efficient way to destabilize an empire was not to fight it directly, but to remove its heart. Isabella DeLuca was not just Marco's mother. She was by all accounts the reason the DeLuca operation had the loyalty it did. She was the one who remembered birthdays and funerals, who made the calls when someone's kid got in trouble, who had held the whole thing together in the months after Marco's father died and before Marco was ready to take the reins. The men who worked for Marco didn't just fear him, they loved Isabella. And the Vasquez organization knew that. The voices moved away. The conversation ended. Lena finished with the lamp. She carried the broken pieces out in a small bag and delivered them to the service area, and then she went back to checking on Isabella, and she did not say a word about what she'd heard, because what would she say, and to whom, and why would anyone listen? She was nobody. She was invisible. She was staff. That night she called Danny. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up, and she could tell from the way he said her name, Lena, slightly roughened, still even after 8 months in the facility, that it had been a hard day. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Better. They changed my therapy schedule. The new counselor is good. Lena, she's really good. She listens, like she actually listens." "Good," Lena said, and she meant it with everything she had. "How are you? You eating?" She had eaten a granola bar that morning and half a sandwich at noon that she'd taken from the kitchen. "Yes," she said. "You sound tired." "I'm always tired. It's fine. Tell me about the new counselor." He talked for 20 minutes. She listened to every word, and when they hung up, she lay in her narrow bed in the small spare room near the service entrance and looked at the ceiling and did the math in her head again the way she always did. $2,400 a month for the facility. Her salary was $3,100 after taxes. Rent on her apartment, which she'd been subletting to a friend's cousin for the past 9 months while she lived here, brought in $800. That left barely anything for the medical bills. And the medical bills were a number that didn't shrink, only grew, and she had stopped looking at the full total because looking at the full total made it hard to breathe. She just needed to keep working, keep her head down, keep being nobody. 3 days was how long that plan lasted, because the morning after she overheard the conversation about the Vasquez organization, everything in the penthouse changed. She noticed it before anyone told her anything. This was another skill she had developed, not the skill of being told things, but the skill of observing them. The guards at the elevator had doubled overnight. The men who came and went from Marco's office were coming more frequently and leaving faster with tighter faces and quicker steps. Caruso was on his phone almost constantly, speaking too quietly for her to hear anything, but with the particular tension in his shoulders that meant the calls were not going well. Isabella noticed too. "Something's happening," she said to Lena that afternoon. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tracking the movements outside her window in the way that old soldiers track the tree line. "I don't know anything specific," Lena said honestly. "No," Isabella said, "but you notice things, don't you?" It wasn't quite a question. "I notice that there are more people in the hallways than usual," Lena said carefully, "and that Mr. Caruso seems under some stress." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "My son will handle it," she said, not hopefully, definitively. "The way you state a fact you have verified many times. He always handles it." "Yes," Lena said. But that evening Marco himself came to Isabella's room, something he did most days, usually in the early morning before his schedule consumed him, but rarely in the evening, and Lena happened to be there in the corner preparing the night medications, which meant she was present for a conversation she probably was not supposed to hear. Marco sat beside his mother's bed. For a moment, he just looked at her, and his face did something it never did in any of the other contexts in which Lena had observed him. It went soft. Not weak, not vulnerable, just human, just the face of a man looking at his mother. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like a woman who wants an honest answer," Isabella said. "What's happening?" A pause. "We're going to move you, tomorrow night, to the estate." Isabella's jaw tightened. "Is it that serious?" "It's a precaution." "Marco." Another pause. There are credible threats. We're taking them seriously. You'll be more protected at the estate." He reached over and covered her hand with his. "I need you to trust me." "I have always trusted you," Isabella said quietly, "even when I didn't agree with you. You know that." "I know," he said. They sat together for a moment, in a silence that Lena did not belong in, but could not leave without drawing attention. She kept her hands steady on the medication bottles, and her eyes on the tray, and her presence as small and inoffensive as she could make it. Then Marco looked up, directly at her. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second before looking back down at the tray. "You," he said. Not unkindly, but not warmly. The way you say you when you're acknowledging the existence of a tool you're about to use. "You ride in the car with her, tomorrow night." "Yes, sir," Lena said. He looked at her for another moment, and she had the strange, disorienting feeling that he was actually seeing her, not the invisible staff member, but her, the actual person for the first time. She couldn't have explained what gave her that feeling. Just something in the quality of his attention. The way his eyes didn't immediately slide away. Then Caruso appeared in the doorway and said his name in a tone that meant something needed handling, and Marco squeezed his mother's hand once, and was gone. Isabella looked at Lena. "In the car with me," she repeated. "That means they consider you safe." Lena thought about what she'd overheard through the wall. Disposable, the men had said, though they hadn't been talking about her. Disposable was a concept she understood. "I'll take care of you," Lena said. "That's my job." Isabella studied her for a moment with those sharp, tired eyes. "You know," she said slowly, "in 40 years of being married to power and then watching my son inherit it, I have learned something." She paused. "The people who say things like 'that's my job' usually mean a great deal more than that." Lena said nothing. She packed Isabella's overnight bag after dinner. She set out the medications in their travel case in order labeled. She confirmed the dosages twice. She laid out Isabella's clothes for the following evening, warm, comfortable, easy to move in, and set them on the chair by the closet where Isabella could see them when she woke up. Then she went to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of something that wasn't quite fear, but was adjacent to it. She had heard what she'd heard. She had seen the guards, the tension, the way Marco's face looked when he thought about the threat to his mother. She knew with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had spent her entire adult life having to see things accurately in order to survive that tomorrow night was not going to be a routine transfer. She called Danny again. He didn't pick up. It was late. He was probably asleep, which was a good sign, sleep being something he'd struggled with for years, and she left a voicemail. "Hey," she said. "It's me. I just wanted to hear your voice. I'm good. Everything's fine. I'll call you this weekend. Love you." She hung up. She sat for another moment. Then she lay down still fully dressed and stared at the ceiling and counted the days again. 11 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days. Danny was doing better. The counselor was good. He was sleeping. That was something. That was everything. She closed her eyes. Outside Chicago pressed itself against the windows, 42 floors of it, below the whole glittering, violent, complicated city. And somewhere in its west side neighborhoods, something that Lena didn't know about yet, was being loaded into vehicles and checked for the last time and set in motion toward a rainy night and a narrow construction zone and 5 bullets that would change everything. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the invisible girl slept. And in the hallway, for reasons he would not have been able to explain and probably wouldn't have acknowledged if asked, Marco DeLuca paused outside the door of the small room near the service entrance for just a moment, just a beat longer than the pace of his walk required, before continuing on. She woke up before her alarm. That was unusual. Lena was a disciplined sleeper, not because sleep came easily, but because she had trained herself to use every minute of it the way you use every scrap of food when there isn't enough. But at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before her alarm was set to go off, her eyes opened and she was immediately completely awake. No grogginess, no gradual return to consciousness, just awake the way animals are awake when something in the air has shifted. She lay still for a moment listening. The penthouse at night had its own sounds, the low hum of the ventilation system, the distant elevator, the occasional footstep of a guard doing his rotation. She had memorized all of these sounds over 11 months, the way you memorize the sounds of a place you're not entirely sure is safe. And right now, at 4:47 in the morning, there were more footsteps than usual. More voices too low to make out words, but high enough in frequency that she could feel them. A kind of vibration in the walls. Something had happened overnight. She got up, dressed quickly, and went to check on Isabella. Isabella was already awake. She was sitting in the chair by the window, in her robe hands folded in her lap, and she looked at Lena when she came in with the expression of a woman who had been awake for hours and was done pretending otherwise. "They moved the time," Isabella said. "We leave at 8 tonight instead of 10. "Did they say why?" "They never say why." A pause. "Marco was in here at 3 in the morning. He thought I was sleeping." Her voice was dry. "I have not slept past 3 in the morning since 1987. Lena set down the medication tray. "How are you feeling?" "Like a woman being moved around a board game." Isabella looked at her hands. "I hate this. I have always hated this. This waiting, being protected, being the thing everyone is trying to keep safe." She looked up. "You understand that, don't you? You don't like being handled either." Lena measured out the morning medications without answering immediately. Then she said, "I don't have much experience being handled. Nobody's ever thought I was worth the effort." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Then they were fools," she said simply, and held out her hand for the pills. The morning moved fast after that. Too fast. The kind of fast that feels choreographed, where everyone has been given a role and a mark to hit, and the whole thing has the brittle energy of a plan that's been rehearsed too many times to feel natural anymore. Caruso briefed the household at 7. 3 vehicles, Marco in the lead, Isabella and Lena in the middle SUV with 2 guards, a 3rd vehicle behind as tail security. The route had been selected. Caruso said this with a particular emphasis, like a man who wanted you to know that serious professionals had made serious decisions, and it would take them out through the East Corridor down to the secured parking structure, and onto a route that would bring them to the estate in approximately 40 minutes. Lena listened to all of this from the back of the room near the door, in her usual position, present, unobtrusive cataloging. And something bothered her. She couldn't name it immediately. It was the kind of thing that lives just below the level of articulation, a wrongness you feel before you can explain it. She turned it over while she helped Isabella get dressed, while she packed the last of the medications into the travel case, while she did the final check of the room that had been Isabella's world for the past several months. The route. That was it. She had heard Caruso say the route, not the specific streets, but the general direction, the general corridor, and she had thought, without meaning to, without being able to help it, that's the obvious choice, which meant anyone who knew the DeLuca operation well enough to plan an ambush would know it too. She almost said something. She actually opened her mouth standing in the hallway outside Isabella's room with the travel case in her hand, and almost said something to one of the guards. A younger one, Petrov, who was the only one in the household who had ever spoken to her voluntarily, who had once asked her opinion on which painkiller was better for a shoulder injury, and who she therefore considered in her very limited social landscape, here's something approaching a human being. But Petrov was on his radio listening hard, and his face had the particular closed-off look of someone receiving information that required immediate processing, and Lena thought about what she was. Nobody invisible staff, a woman who had been hired to give an old woman her pills and read to her from Italian novels, and she closed her mouth. She picked up the travel case. She followed the others toward the elevator. Marco was already in the lobby when they came down. He was in dark clothing, and he was speaking quietly to 2 men Lena didn't recognize, bigger than the usual guards, with the specific quality of stillness that suggested professional violence as a routine practice. He glanced at the elevator when it opened. His eyes went immediately to his mother, checking her, the way you check something precious quickly and completely. Then they moved to Lena, just for a second, with that same quality of attention she'd felt the night before. Then he looked away and went back to his conversation. Isabella walked past her son without stopping, but she reached out as she passed him and touched his arm just once, just briefly, and Marco's hand came up and covered hers for exactly 1 second before they both continued moving in their respective directions. It was so fast, most people would have missed it. Lena didn't miss it. They loaded into the vehicles in the secured parking structure. Isabella moved carefully into the middle SUV, and Lena got in beside her, and the two guards took the front seats. The doors closed. The engine started. The sound changed everything, muffled, pressurized the particular enclosed quality of an armored vehicle, and then they were moving. Isabella reached over without looking at Lena and took her hand. Lena held it. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that would make this less of what it was. Isabella's hand was thin and cool, and she held on with a steadiness that was its own kind of statement. This woman had been through things Lena couldn't imagine. Whatever was happening outside these windows was not the first time she had sat in an armored car and waited. They were 12 minutes into the drive when Lena felt it again. That wrongness. That particular calibration of something that doesn't fit. She didn't have a window seat. Isabella was on the window side and Lena was in the middle, and she couldn't see much. But she could feel the turns left, and then a long right, and she had paid attention to the route description, and this didn't match. "Hey," she said to the guard in the passenger seat. Not loudly, just enough. "This doesn't feel like the East Corridor route." The guard half turned. "Adjusted route. Last minute. Don't worry about it." "Who adjusted it?" "Above my pay grade." He turned back forward. Isabella's hand tightened slightly on hers. Lena looked at the back of the driver's head. She looked at the guard's shoulders. She thought about the Vasquez organization. She thought about credible threats. She thought about the word that had come through the wall 2 days ago, not after territory, after the family. She thought about how an adjusted route announced at the last minute, with no explanation, in a convoy, carrying the one person that a rival organization had specifically targeted, was either a professional security decision made by people who knew what they were doing, or it was something else entirely. "Mrs. DeLuca," she said quietly, "does Marco know the route was changed?" Isabella looked at her. "Why wouldn't he?" "I don't know. I want to confirm something." She leaned forward. "Can you reach Caruso on that radio?" The guard in the passenger seat turned all the way around now. "Lady, relax. We know what we're doing." "I'm sure you do. I'd just like to hear Caruso confirm the route change." "That's not how this works." "I understand that. But Mrs. DeLuca's heart medication requires—" She reached for the travel case, making her hands very deliberate and visible. "Very specific handling, and if we're going somewhere different than expected, I need to make sure I have the right—" "Fine." The guard picked up his radio. "Caruso. Carter woman in Vehicle 2 wants route confirmation. Over." Static. Then Caruso's voice slightly compressed. "What's the problem?" "She's asking about the route change." A pause. Longer than it should have been. "What route change?" Caruso said. The guard in the front seat went very still, and then everything happened at once. The radio exploded with voices. Caruso, Marco, other call signs Lena didn't know, all suddenly loud, all suddenly urgent. The driver grabbed his radio and started talking fast. The guard in the passenger seat had his weapon out before Lena even fully processed that he'd moved. Marco's voice cutting through everything else on the radio, sharp and absolutely controlled. "All units abort. Abort route. Pull over and hold position. Now." The SUV lurched to a stop. Isabella made a small sound, not fear exactly, more like recognition. The sound of someone who has heard this kind of urgency before and knows what it means. "What's happening?" she said. Her voice was steady, that DeLuca steadiness, that absolute refusal to break. "Staying put," the driver said. "Boss's orders." Outside, she could hear even through the armored doors the sound of the lead vehicle stopping ahead of them. She couldn't hear anything else, which meant Marco hadn't turned around yet, which meant he was waiting for information. Her heart was hammering. She pressed her hand over Isabella's and kept her breathing controlled, because if she panicked, Isabella would feel it, and Isabella could not afford panic right now, not with her heart. The radio went quiet for approximately 45 seconds. 45 seconds is a very long time when you're sitting in an armored vehicle in the middle of Chicago, wondering if someone is about to try to kill the woman whose hand you're holding. Then Caruso's voice came back, Low, fast, professional. Route is compromised. Repeat route is compromised. We have eyes on a staging position 2 blocks ahead. We're rerouting. Isabella closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. Someone on the inside, she said, not a question. We don't know that yet, the guard said. Don't be stupid, Isabella said quietly. The only people who knew that route were inside this household. The silence that followed that statement had a particular weight to it. They held position for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of the radio going back and forth of the driver and the guard, exchanging quick looks of Isabella, sitting with the terrible stillness of someone who is keeping themselves together by sheer force of will. Lena kept holding her hand. Then Marco's voice on the radio. We move in 2. New route. Vehicle order stays. Everyone tight. The engine started again, and Isabella turned to look at Lena, really look at her, the way she had looked at her that first day with those sharp eyes that didn't miss anything, and said very quietly, You knew. I didn't know, Lena said. I felt something wrong. You asked Caruso. I just wanted to confirm. Isabella was quiet for a moment. The vehicle began to move again cautiously in a different direction than before. My son has 100 people working for him, she said. Intelligence people, security people, men who have been doing this for 20 years. She paused, and a caregiver asked the right question. Lena didn't say anything. Why? Isabella said, not accusingly, genuinely. You could have stayed quiet. You could have let it go. You had no reason to make yourself noticeable. Lena thought about this honestly. You were holding my hand, she said finally. I wasn't going to let something happen to you while you were holding my hand. Isabella looked at her for another long moment. Then she turned forward again, but she didn't let go of Lena's hand. They made it to the estate. The new route added 22 minutes to the drive, and by the time they pulled through the gates, Lena's whole body had the heavy, wrung-out feeling of sustained adrenaline finally releasing. She helped Isabella out of the vehicle. She walked beside her through the entrance of the estate, carrying the travel case doing her job. And that's when Marco appeared. He came around the front of the lead vehicle, and he was looking at his mother first, checking her the same fast, complete assessment as before. Isabella waved him off with one hand. I'm fine. Stop fussing. And he exhaled once very quickly, the only sign of relief he appeared willing to show. Then he looked at Lena. He crossed to where she was standing in about 6 steps and stopped in front of her. Up close, he was even more everything. More presence, more intensity, the kind of person who took up space without apparently trying. You flagged the route, he said. I asked a question, Lena said. That question saved. He stopped, seemed to rearrange something inside himself. You weren't supposed to notice that. I notice things, she said, simply. He looked at her the way he had looked at her through the doorway of Isabella's room, that quality of attention that felt like being actually seen, and this time he didn't look away when Caruso appeared at his shoulder. Sir, Caruso said, we need to debrief. Give me a minute, Marco said without looking at Caruso. Caruso gave him the minute. Why did you ask? Marco said. Most people in your position, they hear adjusted route. They accept it. They don't ask questions. Lena considered lying. She considered deflecting. Old habits. She said, because I heard something 2 days ago. Through the wall in the sitting room. 2 of your men talking about the threat. About your mother specifically. She met his eyes. The route felt too predictable. Too obvious. I didn't know if the change was security or if it was the other thing. I just knew I needed to know which. A muscle moved in Marco's jaw. 2 days ago, he said quietly. I know I should have said something then. I didn't think anyone would listen to me. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that precedes a reckoning. You're right, Marco said finally, and the 2 words cost him something she could tell. They wouldn't have. He looked at her for another moment. They will now. He turned and walked away toward Caruso and the debrief and the machinery of his complicated and violent world. Lena stood in the driveway of the estate and breathed the night air and thought about Danny asleep in his facility on the south side and thought about how she had almost said nothing almost stayed invisible, almost let the practiced disappearing act of 11 months run all the way to its natural end. She thought about Isabella's hand holding hers in the dark of that armored car. She thought about how Marco had said, "They will now," and how those 3 words had landed somewhere inside her that she wasn't prepared for. She picked up the travel case. She went inside. She got Isabella settled, checked her vitals, administered the evening medications, and sat in the chair by the bed until Isabella's breathing evened out into sleep. Then she went to the small room they'd assigned her in the estate, nicer than the penthouse room, which surprised her, and she sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. Just slightly. Just now when there was no one to see. Outside she could hear Marco's voice somewhere in the house, low, controlled, relentless, taking the night apart piece by piece to find out who had changed that route and who had told them to change it. And inside her chest something was shifting. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt dangerous in a completely different way from anything she'd survived so far. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They took a long time. She woke up to the sound of someone knocking on her door at 2 a.m. Not the tentative knock of household staff, not the measured knock of a guard doing a wellness check. A hard, fast knock, the kind that means, "Now not when you're ready." Lena was on her feet before she fully processed being awake. Old reflexes. The reflexes of someone who had spent years being woken by hospital calls, by Danny in crisis, by landlords and bill collectors, and all the other emergencies that come with the specific kind of poverty where there is no buffer between you and the world. She opened the door. It was Petrov. His face was wrong tight in a way she hadn't seen before, even in the car yesterday when everything went sideways. "Get dressed," he said. "We have a situation." "Isabella." "She's fine. Get dressed. Now." She was dressed in 40 seconds. Petrov walked fast and she matched his pace, and he didn't speak again until they were in the corridor outside the main operations room, where she could already hear Marco's voice on the other side of the door, controlled quiet, devastating in its precision. "Talk," Petrov said, stopping her with one hand. "The guy who changed the route. We found him." He looked at her directly. He gave up the convoy details to the Vasquez organization. All of it. Vehicle positions, timing, everything. Lena's stomach dropped. All of it. All of it. Which means they knew Isabella was in the middle vehicle. He paused. They also knew who else was in that vehicle. She understood what he was telling her before he finished saying it. "They knew I was in there." The tip specified that Vehicle 2 contained the primary target and, he stopped, expendable personnel. They were going to hit Vehicle 2 first and hardest. Isabella was the goal, but anyone else in that car? He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Lena stood very still for a moment. She thought about sitting in that armored SUV holding Isabella's hand. She thought about the 45 seconds of radio silence. She thought about the word expendable and how familiar it felt, how unsurprising, how completely consistent with every category she had ever been placed in by every person in a position of power she had ever encountered. "Okay," she said. Petrov looked at her. "Okay. What do you need from me?" He stared at her for another second like a man recalibrating. "Nothing right now. Boss wants you to know." Petrov paused, and something moved across his face that she'd never seen there before, something that looked almost like discomfort, like a man who's been asked to deliver a message that doesn't quite fit the language he's used to speaking. "He said to tell you that you're not invisible anymore." His words. She didn't respond to that. She couldn't. The phrase landed somewhere she wasn't equipped to deal with at 2 a.m. in a hallway outside a room where a Mafia boss was quietly destroying the man who had tried to get his mother killed. "Go back to sleep," Petrov said. "Tomorrow is going to be long." He was not wrong. The next 36 hours at the estate had the quality of a held breath. Lena did her job medications, vitals reading soup, the ordinary architecture of keeping Isabella alive, and as comfortable as possible while around her. The DeLuca organization moved at a frequency she could feel in her teeth. Men came and went. Conversations happened in rooms she passed, but never entered. Marco was everywhere and nowhere, always in motion, always in that state of absolute focused control that she was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but its most extreme compression. Isabella watched all of it with the patience of a woman who has been through this before and knows that the best thing she can do is not add to the weight. On the second morning, she said to Lena, "He asked about you." Lena looked up from the medication tray. "I'm sorry." "Marco, last night after dinner, he asked how you were managing." Isabella paused. "I told him you were fine. He said, 'I know she's fine, that's not what I asked.'" Another pause. "I thought you should know." Lena set down the medication bottle carefully. "What did you tell him?" "I told him she's managing the way she always manages, by making herself small and hoping no one looks directly at her." Isabella's eyes were very level. He didn't like that answer. "I'm not sure it's his business." "No," Isabella said. "But you made it his business the moment you asked Caruso that question. In this world, Lena, when you save something that belongs to someone, when you protect what they love, you become their concern. That's not a rule. That's just how it is." Lena went back to the medications. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. The call came on the third day. She was in the garden corridor. The estate had gardens. Actual gardens, which struck her every time as almost absurdly normal against everything else happening here when her phone buzzed. The number was the rehabilitation facility. She picked up immediately. Facility calls were never casual. "Ms. Carter." The voice was professional, measured, which was worse than if it had been urgent. Measured meant they'd had time to prepare what they were saying. "I'm calling about Daniel. He had an episode last night. He's medically stable, but there were some complications with his treatment plan, and we need to discuss his continued placement here." She had heard this kind of sentence before. Continued placement was code for something else, something that had to do with billing. "What happened?" she said. "The details are something we should discuss in person or at minimum over a more secure call. But I want you to be aware his insurance claim for this quarter was denied. The facility has policies about—" "I understand the policies," she said. Her voice came out steady, and she was grateful for that. "I'll handle it. When do you need an answer?" "By end of week." "Okay." She stopped walking. "Is he all right? Is Danny okay right now?" "He's stable. He's resting. He had a hard night, but is he asking for me?" A brief pause. "Yes. Tell him I'll call tonight. Tell him I said he doesn't have anything to worry about." She hung up. She stood in the garden corridor and did the math in her head the way she always did, except this time, the math didn't work. It hadn't worked in a while, and she'd been managing by not looking at it directly, by staying in motion, by keeping the pile of debt at the edge of her peripheral vision where it couldn't stop her. But end of week was a hard deadline, and the number required to save Danny's placement was a number she didn't have. She called the facility's billing department. She explained her situation in language that was calm and specific, and utterly without self-pity, because self-pity cost energy she couldn't spare. The billing coordinator said they understood, and they were sorry, and the policy was the policy. She hung up. She looked at the wall of the corridor for a moment. Then she heard footsteps behind her and turned. Marco was standing 10 feet away. He had clearly been heading somewhere else and had stopped. His eyes were on her face, and she realized with a jolt that she had forgotten to put her expression back together. Whatever had been on her face in the last 2 minutes of that phone call was still there, unguarded, visible. She fixed it immediately. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "Who was on the phone?" he said, not demanding, just asking. It was personal. "You've been standing in this corridor for 6 minutes." She almost asked how he knew that, and then realized it was a surveillance estate, and of course he knew. "Personal call," she said again. "It's handled." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "No, it isn't." "Excuse me." "Whatever it is, it's not handled. You look like someone who just got told the last door closed." He took 2 steps closer, not threatening, just reducing the distance to a range where he could speak quietly and still be heard. "Tell me." "Mr. DeLuca." "Marco." She stopped. The single word, just his name said, that simply redirected something in the conversation that she hadn't been ready for. "It's my brother," she said, because apparently she was going to tell him apparently the combination of his directness and her exhaustion had worn through the barrier she'd been maintaining for 11 months. He's in a rehabilitation facility. His insurance claim was denied. If I don't cover the shortfall by end of week, they'll discharge him." She said it the way she'd said everything else to him, straight, no editorializing, no bid for sympathy. "I'll figure it out." "How long has he been in rehab?" 8 months. "And you've been covering this alone?" "He's my brother." Marco's jaw was tight. "How much?" "That's not—" "How much, Lena?" she told him. "The number." She said it the way you say a number that has been sitting on your chest for so long, it's become part of your body quietly, without drama, the way you admit something you've accepted, even if you haven't resolved it. He didn't react to the number the way she expected. He didn't wince. He didn't reassure her. He just looked at her with those dark eyes that she was learning to read slightly, the way you learn to read weather, and said, "You've been doing this the whole time, the whole 11 months. "Yes." "While working for us." "Yes." "Eating nothing from what my mother tells me." Lena blinked. "Your mother?" "My mother notices everything," he said. "She told me last week that you take half portions at meals, that you sent money home instead of buying a winter coat, that you've been wearing the same 3 sets of clothes for almost a year." His voice was still controlled, still quiet, but there was something moving underneath it now, something with heat in it. "Nobody told me. Nobody thought to tell me." "It's not anyone's responsibility to—" "You asked a question in that car that saved my mother's life," he said. "And there it was, the heat fully present now, no longer underneath anything. You sat in a vehicle that they planned to destroy, and you held her hand, and you noticed what trained professionals missed, and you still think your life is yours to burn through alone." "My life is mine," she said. "That's not—" "I'm not arguing with you," he said. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Daniel's billing is handled. Today. Not a loan, not a favor with a price. It's done." She stared at him. "You can't—" "I already did." He pulled out his phone, showed her a screen she didn't fully process in her shock, and put it back in his pocket. "Caruso handled it 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes ago. She stopped. "You were all ready. Petrov told me about the call this morning, that you got a call from a medical number and that you went very still when you answered it." He paused. "I've been watching you be still for 3 days, Lena. There's still, and then there's the kind of still that means someone is holding everything together with their teeth." She didn't say anything. She was having a hard time finding language for what was happening in her chest, which was a confusing and poorly timed combination of relief and fury, and something she couldn't label that had nothing to do with either of those things. "I don't need to be rescued," she said finally. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I know," he said. "You've proved that repeatedly." He met her eyes. "But you also don't have to keep burning yourself down to keep everyone else warm. There's a difference between not needing rescue and refusing help out of habit." That one landed. It landed hard in exactly the place that was least defended, because it was true in a way that she had never let herself look at directly. Refusing help out of habit. How many times had she said no when yes was available? How many times had she starved herself of every ordinary thing because allowing herself anything felt like a dangerous precedent? Like the moment you accepted something was the moment you became someone who could be controlled by the threat of having it taken away. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It came out with more vulnerability than she intended, and she didn't take it back. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you held my mother's hand in the dark," he said. "And that's the truest answer I have right now." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Something passed between them that wasn't a conversation and wasn't nothing. Then his phone rang. The sharp, insistent ring of something that required him immediately. He glanced at it, then back at her. "Call your brother," he said. "Tell him he's staying." He answered the phone and walked away, already back in his other world, the one made of crisis and strategy and the management of violence. Lena stood in the corridor. She called Danny. He picked up on the first ring this time. "Lena, did they call you? I'm so sorry, I know the money." "It's handled," she said. A pause. "What do you mean handled?" "I mean it's handled. You're staying. Don't worry about the money." "Lena, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. Someone—" She stopped. She didn't know how to explain Marco DeLuca to Danny, not in any version that made sense. "Someone helped," she said. That's all. It's handled. She heard Danny exhale, a long, ragged exhale that had 8 months of fear and 2 years of damage in it. I'm scared I'm going to waste it, he said quietly. I'm scared I'm going to get better and then mess it up again. I do better, and I'm scared of that too. I know, she said. That's what better feels like at first. It feels like a liability. She leaned against the wall. Keep going anyway. I love you, he said. I love you too. She paused. Do the work. That's all. Just do the work. She hung up. She stood very still for a moment, her own kind of still, the kind she had control over, and then she went back to do her job. She did not see Marco again until that evening. He was in the main room with Caruso and 2 men she didn't know, and she was crossing through on her way from the kitchen with Isabella's evening tea when he glanced up from the table and their eyes met. He gave her one small nod. Just that. Nothing else. She nodded back and kept walking. That night, sitting with Isabella while she slept, Lena did something she hadn't done in a long time. She thought about the future. Not the debt, not the math, not the survival calculation, but the actual future. What it might look like if it didn't have to be built entirely from what was left over after everyone else's emergencies. It was a terrifying thought. She put it away carefully, but she noticed that she'd had it, and that felt like something. 3 hours later, when Isabella was deeply asleep and the estate had settled into its nighttime rhythm, a guard came to tell her that the Vasquez organization had made a formal move. Not a threat this time. An actual coordinated strike on DeLuca territory, 3 locations simultaneously, and Marco had been called to the Situation Room and wouldn't be available until morning. And the convoy, she was told the convoy they had originally planned, the one that had been intercepted and redirected, had been the first target. If they had taken the original route, if she hadn't asked the question, if Caruso had said the right thing on that radio 2 days ago, instead of the 3 words that changed everything, what route change they would have driven straight into it. The guard said this matter-of-factly, the way men in this world reported information. Then he left. Lena sat back down in the chair beside Isabella's bed. She looked at the old woman's sleeping face, the lines of a life fully lived, the stubborn beauty of someone who had survived more than anyone knew, and she thought about 5 seconds. The 5 seconds it had taken her to decide to open her mouth and ask the question she almost didn't ask. She looked at her own hands. And in the Situation Room down the hall, she could hear Marco's voice, still controlled, still precise, still the voice of a man who had never in his adult life let anything break him, giving orders in the dark. Neither of them knew what was still coming. The strike on DeLuca territory lasted 4 hours. Lena knew this because she counted. She sat in the chair beside Isabella's bed, and she counted the minutes, the way she counted everything methodically without drama, because counting gave shape to time that otherwise felt like it was dissolving. She listened to the muffled activity down the hall. She monitored Isabella's breathing. She checked the pulse oximeter every 20 minutes. She did her job. At 4:17 in the morning, the sounds from the Situation Room changed. Not louder, quieter. The particular quiet that follows resolution when the crisis has either been handled or has become something larger than handling. She didn't find out which until Marco appeared in the doorway of Isabella's room at 4:40. He looked like a man who had spent 4 hours making decisions with permanent consequences. His face was composed as always, but there was a quality to the composition now, a tightness around his eyes, a set to his jaw that told her the night had not gone cleanly. He looked at his mother first, then at Lena. "She slept through it," he said quietly. "Yes, her vitals are good." He nodded. He came in and stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, just looking at Isabella the way he always did, that brief, complete assessment that was both tactical and something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with tactics. Then he said, without looking at Lena, "The Vasquez operation hit 3 of our locations tonight. We held 2, lost 1. A pause. 6 of our men are in the hospital. 2 of theirs are dead." She didn't respond. She didn't know what response was appropriate, and she had learned that in this world, silence was more respectful than filling space with words that didn't fit. "They're not done," he said. He turned from the bed and looked at her directly. "This was a test. They were seeing how we respond, where we're soft, what we prioritize." His voice was steady and analytical, and she could see him processing even as he spoke, running calculations she didn't have access to. They know we prioritize this house. They know my mother is here. What does that mean for the next move? She asked. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or something adjacent to it, like he hadn't expected the question to be operational rather than frightened. It means we can't stay, he said. The estate was supposed to be the secure option. It's been compromised too. Not physically, not yet, but they know we're here, which means we need to move again, tomorrow night. Lena thought about Isabella's heart, about her lungs, about the toll that 2 moves in 4 days had already taken on a 71-year-old woman with cardiovascular damage, even if Isabella herself would never admit to being taxed by it. She needs 24 hours of rest before another move, Lena said. At minimum, her system can handle the stress of relocation, but not without recovery time in between. If you move her again tomorrow without that buffer, you risk an episode. Marco looked at her. An episode? Cardiac, possibly respiratory. She's stronger than she looks, but she's not invincible, and the stress hormones from tonight alone, even sleeping, have physiological effects. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what her body can handle. You make the call. He was quiet for a moment. 36 hours, he said finally. I can buy 36 hours if I adjust the perimeter. That works, she said. He looked at her for another beat, that quality of attention she had stopped trying to deflect because it seemed to have no off switch. Then he said, Go sleep. You've been up since 2. I'm fine. That's not what I said. Not harsh, not soft either, just factual. The voice of a man who had decided something and was stating it as a conclusion rather than an opening for debate. I'll have someone sit with her. Go sleep, Lena. It was the first time he had used her name without a preceding title. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, quietly, precisely filing it somewhere she would examine later. She went to sleep. She woke up 8 hours later to sunlight and the distant smell of coffee, and beneath that, something that her body identified before her brain did as wrong. Not a sound, not a smell, just a quality to the air that she had learned in this house in these days to pay attention to. She dressed quickly and went to find Isabella. Isabella was awake and sitting up and looked if anything stronger than the day before. The rest had done something. Her color was better and her hands were steadier, and she was in the middle of an argument with a guard about whether she was allowed to go to the terrace. She can go to the terrace, Lena said, walking in. The guard looked at her. Security protocol says, I'll stay with her. Keep the perimeter tight. 15 minutes of fresh air does more for her cardiovascular system than another hour in this room. She looked at Isabella. 15 minutes, then medications. 20, Isabella said. 17. Isabella almost smiled. Fine. They sat on the terrace in the morning light, and Isabella wrapped both hands around her coffee cup the way she always did, and for 17 minutes neither of them talked about Vasquez or convoys or the 6 men in the hospital or any of it. Isabella asked Lena about Danny. She had apparently extracted the full story from somewhere, probably from Marco, probably recently, and Lena told her about the counselor, about the sleep, about the phone call. He's fighting, Lena said. That's all you can do. Just keep fighting. You taught him that, Isabella said. Not a question. My mother taught us both. She just didn't stay long enough to finish the job. Lena paused. She almost never said things like that. She wasn't sure why she was saying it now. She died when I was 16. Danny was 9. Isabella set down her coffee. She looked at Lena with the full weight of her attention. You raised him. I tried. You gave him everything you had. Every single year since you were 16 years old, you gave everything you had to someone else. Isabella's voice was very quiet. And then you came here and you gave everything you had to me. That's the job, Lena said automatically, and then stopped, because she had said those words before, and Isabella had responded to them before, and she remembered what she'd said. You know, the people who say that's my job usually mean a great deal more than that. Isabella just looked at her. 17 minutes, Lena said. Let's get you inside. The 36 hours passed. They were not calm hours. Nothing in this house was calm. The tension running at a constant low-grade frequency that everyone had adapted to the way you adapt to chronic noise. But they were manageable hours. Lena did her job. Marco ran his operation. Isabella read, argued mildly with her guards, and occasionally looked at Lena with that sharp-eyed assessment that Lena had learned to live with. Marco came to her once more late on the second afternoon and told her the new route. Different vehicle order this time, Isabella in the rear vehicle, higher security rating, the middle SUV now carrying decoy personnel. He explained it to her in full, which surprised her because she had no tactical authority here and no reason to be briefed. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Because last time you noticed something the professionals missed, he said, and I've decided that's not a coincidence. That's a skill. He paused. Tell me if anything sounds wrong. She listened to the full plan. She asked 2 questions. One about the timing relative to shift changes at a nearby precinct, which she'd noticed from a prior conversation, and one about the secondary route option if the primary was blocked. Marco answered both. He then turned to Caruso and said, "Update the timing," which made Caruso's face do something complicated. When Caruso had gone, Marco said, "You're not comfortable with this." "I'm fine." "You're doing the still thing again." She looked at him. "The still thing." "The thing where you go very quiet and your face goes very neutral and you're actually working through something at high speed." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something before a smile. "I've been watching you do it for 3 days. I recognize it now." She didn't know what to do with the information that Marco De Luca had been watching her closely enough to identify a specific facial pattern. She filed it in the category of things to examine later, which was becoming a very full category. "I just keep thinking about the insider," she said. "The man who changed the route the first time. Is he the only one?" Marco's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight compression, a small hardening of something that had briefly gone soft. "We don't know yet. Which means there could be others. Which means there could be others." They looked at each other. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, and then quieter. "Stay close to her. Whatever happens, just stay close to her." "I always do," Lena said. She thought afterward about the way he'd said it. Stay close to her, not as an instruction to staff, as a request from a man to a person he trusted. She was still thinking about it when the convoy assembled in the estate garage at 9 that night. The night was wet. Rain had started an hour before departure and was coming down in the particular relentless Chicago way, not dramatic, just committed the kind of rain that soaks through everything given enough time. The garage smelled of exhaust and damp concrete, and the particular metallic tension of armed men in an enclosed space. Isabella took Lena's arm getting into the vehicle. She didn't usually do that. She was a woman of fierce independence in matters of physical capability, and accepting help was something she did on her terms, and nobody else's. The fact that she reached for Lena's arm tonight without being asked in front of 6 guards and Caruso told Lena exactly how she felt about this transfer. "You're all right," Lena said quietly. "I know," Isabella said fiercely. "I know I am." They were in the rear vehicle this time. Different configuration, 4 guards instead of 2, and a driver who had the energy of someone who had been specifically selected for this job and knew exactly what was expected of him. The vehicle was heavier than the last one, more reinforced. Lena could feel it in the way it moved. They pulled out at 9/12. The convoy moved well for the first 7 minutes. Lena tracked the turns. They matched the briefing. She kept one hand near Isabella's and the other in her lap, and she breathed steadily and watched the back of the driver's head and listened to the radio chatter in the front professional measured clear. At the 8-minute mark, the lead vehicle's radio went to short burst. Something about a traffic obstruction 3 blocks ahead. A construction zone partially blocking the road that hadn't been on any of the route maps because it had gone up in the last 24 hours. Caruso's voice on the radio, "Assess and report, lead vehicle. It's passable, tight but passable. Recommend we push through. Alternate adds 12 minutes. A pause from Caruso. Then push through, stay tight." Lena felt it again. That wrongness, that calibration of something that doesn't fit. A construction zone that went up in the last 24 hours, on their route, the night they were moving. "Stop," she said. The guard in front turned. What? Tell them to stop. Don't go through the construction zone. Lady, we've been through this. Radio Caruso, right now. Tell him the construction zone is wrong. It's wrong. It went up in the last day. You need to verify. Carter. Radio Caruso. Her voice came out harder than she'd ever let it come out in this house, harder than she'd spoken to anyone in years, with all the force of every silent month compressed into 2 words. The guard stared at her. Isabella said quietly, absolutely, do it. He reached for the radio. He never finished the transmission. The explosion hit the lead vehicle like a physical wall of sound. Not the vehicle itself, not yet, but something in the road ahead of it, a pressure device that lifted the front of the SUV and threw it sideways. Lena felt the concussion in her chest before she heard it, a heavy thud that rearranged something in her ribcage. Then the gunfire started. She grabbed Isabella and pulled her down, not gently, no time for gentle, and covered her with her body and pressed them both into the footwell between the seats. The reinforced glass above them shook and held. The guards in front were already responding, already on their weapons, shouting positions into the radio. The ambush was fast and professional and clearly planned with significant intelligence about the convoy's configuration, because the fire was concentrated on the lead and middle vehicles, trying to create chaos at the front of the line and separate the security response. It was working. She could hear it working, the radio in front, fragmenting into multiple voices. Marco's voice somewhere in it, controlled and dangerous, and giving orders that she couldn't fully process over the noise. They were pinned. 3 minutes into the ambush, the rear door of their vehicle took a direct hit. Not penetrating the reinforcement held, but the impact was massive enough that Isabella made a sound and Lena pressed harder over her. Isabella. She got her face close. I need you to breathe, slow, with me. I'm breathing, Isabella said through her teeth. Good, don't stop. The radio crackled. Vehicle 3, they're flanking left, you have a... The door burst open. Not from a hit. From a human force, the door mechanism failing under targeted interference. Someone who knew exactly which mechanism to target. Cold air and rain poured in, and Lena had 1 second of pure clarity in which she saw a man armed filling the doorway, his weapon coming up toward Isabella's position. Isabella had not moved from under Lena. She was still pressed into the footwell, which meant the man in the doorway was looking at Lena first. Their eyes met. He repositioned toward Isabella, and Lena moved. She didn't think about it. There was nothing to think about. The same instinct that had made her ask the question in the car 2 weeks ago, the same reflex that had made her cover an old woman in a vehicle while bullets hit the windows. It didn't ask her permission. It just moved her. She threw herself between the weapon and Isabella. She heard the shots. Pop, 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 pop. She heard them the way you hear something that your brain can't categorize in real time as a series of sounds, separate, almost abstract. And then the impact arrived, and it was nothing like she would have imagined. Not sharp, not burning the way people described, just a series of heavy pressures in quick succession, like being hit with something enormous and hot. And then she was on the floor of the vehicle, and she wasn't sure how she'd gotten there. She heard from very far away the sound of the attacker being dealt with. 1 shot. Then silence from that direction. She heard Isabella's voice directly above her saying her name, Lena, 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 in a voice that didn't sound like Isabella at all, because Isabella DeLuca had a voice of absolute control, and what Lena was hearing was the voice of a woman who was not in control, not even slightly, who was pressing both hands somewhere on Lena's body and saying a name like it was the only word left. She heard the radio, Vehicle 3, we have casualties, we need, and then cutting through everything else closer than the radio Marco's voice. Not controlled, not precise, not the voice she had been cataloging for 3 days, the voice of the man who managed violence like a professional instrument. A different voice entirely, raw, desperate, crossing the distance between vehicles in the rain at a run, arriving at the open door, and breaking on a single word in a way she had never heard a word break before. No, she felt his hands, large and urgent, and for once not careful about anything, not calculating, not controlled, just on her, pressing, searching, frantic in the specific way of someone who has never been frantic and doesn't know how to do it and is doing it anyway. Stay with me, he said. "Lena, stay with me right now." She tried to tell him she was trying. She tried to tell him Isabella was safe. She was right there. She was safe. That was the whole point. That was the only point. What came out was very small, just breath mostly. But she felt him hear it, felt him go very still for 1 second, the way you go still when you realize something is still alive that you thought might not be. And then he was moving again, shouting, pulling in everyone within reach, his voice doing something she had never heard it do, begging. Marco DeLuca in the rain, in the wreckage of an ambush, surrounded by his men and his enemies, and everything he had built and controlled for 20 years, begging. "Stay alive," he said very close to her face, and his voice was just a voice now. No empire in it, no authority, nothing but the naked human sound of someone who has found at the worst possible moment that something matters more than everything else. "Lena, please, stay alive." The rain came down. The radio kept talking. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Isabella saying her name still over and over like a prayer or a command. She stayed, barely, but she stayed. The clinic was private. Everything about it was private. The entrance, the staff, the equipment, the absolute silence that surrounded it like a wall. It was the kind of place that didn't exist in any directory, that received no insurance claims, that had no record in any database a civilian might access. It existed because men like Marco DeLuca needed it to exist, and what Marco DeLuca needed, Marco DeLuca built. He had carried her in himself, not handed her off, not directed his men, carried her from the vehicle to the clinic entrance, through the doors, all the way to the operating room threshold, where the surgical team took her from his arms, and even then, he didn't let go immediately. The lead surgeon had to say his name twice before his hands released. Caruso told this to Petrov later in a low voice in the hallway outside the waiting area, in the tone of a man reporting something he wasn't entirely sure he had witnessed correctly. Because in 22 years of working for Marco DeLuca, Caruso had never seen those hands hesitate. Not once. Not over anything. They hesitated over Lena Carter for 4 full seconds. The surgery lasted 6 hours and 40 minutes. Marco did not sit. He stood in the hallway outside the operating room for the first 2 hours, arms crossed back against the wall, absolutely still. Then Isabella arrived. Petrov had driven her separately under heavy guard once the scene was secured, and she walked straight past 3 of her son's men and stood beside him and didn't say anything at all, just stood there. And Marco, without looking at her, put his arm around her shoulders, and Isabella leaned into him. And they stood together in the hallway of a clinic that didn't officially exist, and waited for news of a woman that neither of them had known a year ago, and both of them could not imagine losing. At the 4-hour mark, a nurse came out to update them. Stable but critical. Multiple organ involvement. They were managing the bleeding. It was going to be close. Marco's arm tightened around Isabella's shoulders. "She will make it," Isabella said. Not hopefully. The same way she said everything definitively, as a statement of fact she was willing to stake herself on. "You don't know that," Marco said. His voice was very quiet. "I know her," Isabella said. "She does not give up. She has never given up on anything in her life. She is not going to give up now." She paused. "And she has something to come back for." Marco didn't answer that, but he didn't need to. The way his jaw tightened said everything he wasn't saying, which had become in the last several hours considerably more than usual. At 6 hours 40 minutes, the surgeon came out. He was a precise man who spoke in careful clinical language, which Marco had always appreciated because it meant there was no ambiguity in what he said. Tonight, the careful clinical language said she survived the surgery. She was in critical but stable condition. There was damage to her left lung, 1 kidney, and soft tissue across 3 areas of her torso. She would be in a medically managed coma for a period he couldn't yet specify. The recovery would be long and would require everything she had. Then the surgeon paused, which was unusual for him, and said, "She should not have survived this. By any clinical measure, those 5 shots should have been unsurvivable given their placement and the time elapsed before she reached us." He looked at Marco directly. "She survived because she is constitutionally one of the strongest people I have ever operated on. Whatever she's been through before this, it made her harder to kill than she had any right to be." Marco absorbed this in silence. Then he said, "She's not going to need to be hard to kill ever again. Make sure she has everything." Of course. Everything, Marco repeated. The single word carried a weight of meaning that the surgeon who had been working for the DeLuca organization for 11 years understood completely. Yes, sir, he said. Marco went in to see her when they allowed it. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, just stood there looking at her, the way he had looked at Isabella, in that room on the 42nd floor, except this was different. This had a rawness to it, that the thing with Isabella built over a lifetime had worn smooth. This was new damage. This was a wound that had no scar tissue over it yet. She was very still. The equipment around her made its steady sounds. She looked smaller than she did when she was moving and thinking and asking the questions that changed everything. She looked like what she was, a young woman who had given her body to a decision she made in 1 second, and who was now on the other side of that decision in a way that was going to take months to come back from. He pulled the chair to the side of the bed and sat down. He did not touch her hands, not yet. Not while she was so fragile, not while touching felt like it might disturb something still in the process of being repaired. He just sat there. And for the first time in 22 years of running an empire that required him to be certain about everything, Marco DeLuca sat with uncertainty, with the particular helplessness of a man who can manage every crisis except the ones that live inside him. He could call in every favor in Chicago. He could level the Vasquez organization, which he was already planning to do methodically and completely in a way that would take weeks and would be felt for years. He could build walls and hire armies and control every variable in his world except the one lying in this bed, which was whether she was going to open her eyes. He stayed. The first night, the second, the third. Petrov brought him food he didn't taste. Caruso updated him on operations he approved without his usual focus. Isabella came twice a day, sat on the other side of the bed, sometimes read from the Italian novels she'd brought from the estate, her voice low and steady, filling the room with words Lena might or might not be able to hear. The doctor said hearing was often the last thing to go and the first to return. Isabella took this seriously. She read every day. On the fourth day, something happened that shook the organization in a way the ambush itself hadn't. Caruso came to Marco in the clinic hallway with a physical file thick assembled overnight with the particular weight of something that had required significant resources to compile. He held it out without speaking. Marco looked at him before taking it. Caruso's face said everything. Inside the file was Lena Carter's life. Not a background check, they'd done those when she was hired. This was deeper. This was the actual architecture of a person, the structure beneath the surface, the thing you find when you look at someone with the full resources of an operation that has been gathering information about people for 30 years. 11 months of pay stubs cross-referenced against bank records that showed almost nothing retained. Every dollar accounted for facility fees, medical billing, a rent payment to herself that was actually a sublet she'd arranged so she could afford to live in the penthouse service room and funnel her housing income to Danny's care. Grocery receipts that averaged out to less than $40 a week. A winter coat she had searched online 17 times over 3 months and never purchased. Medical records she had filled out as next of kin for Daniel Carter, age 27 at 4 different facilities over 6 years. The first one when she was 22 years old and Danny was 18 and had been found unresponsive in an apartment that belonged to neither of them. School records showing Lena Carter had been accepted to nursing school at 20 and had deferred twice and then let the acceptance expire. The deferral forms both cited financial hardship and family emergency. Letters, actual letters, scanned that she had written to Danny from the year their mother died. The facility had kept them on file, apparently as part of his therapy records. Letters written by a 16-year-old girl to her 9-year-old brother in language that was careful and honest and adult and had absolutely no business being written by someone that age. Letters that said things like, "I'm going to figure this out, and I know it's scary, but I'm right here, and you don't have to be afraid because I'm not going anywhere." Marco read the entire file in the hallway. He stood there for 40 minutes and read every page. Caruso stood nearby and did not speak. When Marco finished, he closed the file. He stood very still for a moment. His face was doing something that Caruso had never seen it do in 22 years, and Caruso had seen that face in circumstances that would break most men. "She was 16, Marco said. His voice was very quiet. "Yes, sir." She was 16 years old and she just took it all on. He stopped, started again. She's been doing this for 12 years, alone. Closer to 13, sir. Marco handed the file back. He turned and went back into Lena's room. He sat back down in the chair. He looked at her face for a long time. Then he did something that later Caruso would tell Petrov about in the same low voice he'd used for the story about the hands at the operating room door, in the tone of a man who has witnessed something he will spend a long time thinking about. Marco DeLuca put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he sat like that in the chair beside the bed of a woman who couldn't hear him and stayed that way for a long time. Not performing, not managing, just sitting with the full weight of what he understood now, which was that the invisible girl had been invisible not because she had nothing to offer, but because she had been spending every single thing she had on someone else for so long that there was nothing left over to spend on being seen. He had not seen her. For 11 months, she had been 40 feet from his mother's bedroom, holding the whole thing together with her bare hands, and he had not seen her. He was not going to make that mistake again. She woke on the 9th day, not dramatically. There was no sudden opening of eyes, no movie moment of return. It was gradual, a shift in her breathing first, then a small movement of her hand, then a long stillness, and then very slowly, her eyelids. Isabella was there. She had been reading Lena's favorite of the Italian novels which Isabella had identified by a process of quiet observation over 11 months, and she looked up when the breathing changed and said her name once quietly, and waited. Lena's eyes opened. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she turned her head very slowly and found Isabella. "Isabella," she said. Her voice came out rough and very small, but it came out. "Don't try to talk," Isabella said. Her own voice was doing something complicated. "Just look at me. That's enough. That's plenty." Lena looked at her. Then her eyes moved, still slow, taking inventory of the room, the way she always took inventory of everything methodically, precisely. She saw the equipment. She processed it. She looked at Isabella again. "You're okay," she said. Not a question. A confirmation she needed to make. "I'm perfectly fine," Isabella said, and her voice broke on the last word in a way that it had never broken in front of anyone ever. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she said steadier, "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met in my 71 years, and that includes my husband and my son, and I will not apologize for saying so." Lena's eyes filled. She didn't blink. She just let it happen, which told Isabella everything about how much the last 9 days had taken from her, that she didn't have the resources left to maintain the stoic front. She was just there in the bed with her eyes full, being seen. "I need to tell Marco," Isabella said, already reaching for her phone. "Wait," Lena said. Her hand moved slightly toward Isabella's. "Wait, just 1 minute. Can we have 1 minute before—" "Of course," Isabella said. She put the phone down. She took Lena's hand. 1 minute. They sat together in the quiet. Lena breathed carefully the way she always breathed when things were hard, deliberately measuring it. Isabella held her hand and didn't fill the silence with anything. Just held on. Then Lena said, "Is he all right?" Isabella looked at her. "My son. He was in the lead vehicle when the explosion—" "He's fine. He's been here." Isabella paused. "He hasn't left." Lena absorbed this without speaking. 9 days, Isabella said quietly. "He has been here for 9 days. He slept in that chair." She nodded toward the chair still positioned at the side of the bed, slightly angled toward Lena's face, the way a chair angles when someone has been sitting in it, watching someone for a long time. He ran his entire operation from this hallway. Caruso and Petrov and everyone else came to him. He didn't go to them. Lena looked at the chair. Something in her face did what it always did when something got through the careful architecture of her composure. It went very still and very open in the particular way that meant she was feeling something she hadn't given herself permission to feel yet. "He read your file," Isabella said. "The real one. Everything." She watched Lena's face. "He knows about Danny, about nursing school, about the letters." A pause. He knows everything, Lena. Lena closed her eyes. He was not unmoved, Isabella said simply. Lena kept her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, she said, "Tell him I'm awake." Marco came in 40 seconds after Isabella's call. He had clearly been close, maybe in the hallway, maybe in the room down the corridor where Caruso set up the mobile operations. He came through the door and stopped a few feet inside it, and he looked at her, and everything he had been holding in controlled compression for 9 days moved across his face in about 2 seconds. He crossed to the chair, sat down. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the doorway of Isabella's room in what felt like another lifetime, that quality of attention that was actually seeing all the way through, no part of her rendered invisible. "Hey," he said. His voice came out rough. "Hey," she said. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has weight and meaning. "You scared me," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." He said it quickly with a sharpness that wasn't anger, just urgency. "Don't you apologize for any of it." She looked at him. "I wasn't apologizing for what I did. I'd do it again." Something crossed his face that was very complex and very human and had nothing of the Mafia boss in it at all. "I know you would," he said. "That's the part that—" He stopped. "That's the part." "Is she really okay?" Lena asked. "My mother is arguing with her cardiologist about whether she needs the extra monitoring. So yes, she's okay." The corner of his mouth moved. "She's been reading to you every day." "I know," Lena said quietly. "I could hear it." Marco's eyes went briefly bright, in a way that he controlled quickly, but not before she saw it. "She didn't know if you could hear." "Tell her I heard every word." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I read your file." "I know. Isabella told me." "All of it," he said. "The billing, the nursing school, the letters you wrote to Danny when you were 16. He held her gaze. "You've been carrying all of that alone. It was mine to carry." "It doesn't have to be anymore," he said. Not as an offer, as a statement of something already decided, the way he made all his decisions completely without ambiguity. Danny's care is handled. The debt is gone, all of it. The medical debt, the facility, everything, it's gone. It's done. She opened her mouth. "Don't argue with me," he said. "You took 5 bullets for my mother. There is no version of this conversation where you talk me out of this." "That's not why I did it," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. "There's an apartment," he said, "in the building adjacent to my mother's, top floor. It's been empty for 2 years. It's yours." He paused. "Not as staff quarters. Not as anything to do with work. Yours. Because you deserve to live somewhere that isn't a service room near a service entrance." "Marco, and your job, if you want it, is still there. But it's a real job now. Real salary, real title, real everything." His voice dropped slightly. "But that's your choice. Everything from here is your choice." She was quiet. She was doing the thing, the still thing, and he let her do it because he knew it now. He knew what it meant. He knew she was processing rather than shutting down. Then she said, "Why are you doing all of this?" He was quiet for a moment. The same moment he'd been quiet for in the corridor when she'd asked a version of this question before. But this time his answer was different. This time it came from somewhere deeper than gratitude and somewhere more honest than obligation. "Because I looked at your file and I saw 13 years of a person spending herself down to nothing for everyone else," he said. "And I looked at this room where you've been lying for 9 days because you threw yourself in front of a bullet without 1 second of hesitation, not for money, not for status, not for anything, except because you weren't going to let someone you cared about get hurt." He paused. "And I realized that I have been surrounded my whole life by people who do things because of what they get. And I couldn't remember the last time I met someone who just acted from something real." Lena's throat was tight. "You changed something," he said quietly. "In me. I don't know exactly what to call it yet, but it changed." She looked at him, the chair angled toward her, the 9 days of vigil visible in the lines of his face. The controlled, careful, ruthless man, sitting with his hands open on his knees in a way she had never seen his hands just open. Nothing held, nothing managed. "Okay," she said, very softly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said again, and something in her face opened not wide, not dramatically, but genuinely, the way a door opens when someone finally uses the right key. "I'll stay," he exhaled. One slow breath all the way out, like a man setting down something very heavy that he'd been carrying without realizing it. Danny came 3 days later. He walked through the clinic door with his counselor beside him. Marco had arranged everything. The transport and the clearance and the careful management of the visit, so it wouldn't overwhelm either of them. And when he saw Lena in the bed, his face did what the faces of people who love each other do when they've been terrified of a loss that didn't happen. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and took both her hands and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he said, "You promised me you were fine." "I was fine," she said. "I got a little less fine temporarily." "Lena." "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." He pressed his forehead to her hands. She felt his shoulders shake once, just once, and then he pulled himself back together with the particular effort of a man who has been working very hard at pulling himself back together and is getting better at it. "The counselor says I'm making real progress," he said after a moment. "I know," she said. "I'm proud of you." "Marco called me," Danny said. He said the name carefully, like a word he was still getting used to. "He called me himself, the day after it happened. He told me what you did." He looked at her. "He told me you'd been covering my bills for 2 years without telling me." She was quiet. "I'm not mad," Danny said. I want you to know I know, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it wasn't wasted." "It wasn't wasted," she said. "Look at you." He almost smiled. "Look at you," he said back with a look at the equipment surrounding her. "I'm fine," she said again, and this time, for the first time in a very long time, it was actually true. The Vasquez organization was dismantled over the following 6 weeks. Marco did it the way he did everything, completely without ambiguity, in a way that left no question about the answer. Chicago felt it. The people who needed to understand the message understood it. The people who needed to not know about it didn't. The DeLuca Empire continued. It was what it was. Marco had no illusions about that, and neither did Lena. She was not under any illusions about the world she had stepped further into or the man she had stepped closer to. She understood it clearly, and she made her choices with open eyes. But something had changed in the operation in the household, in the particular atmosphere of power that surrounded Marco DeLuca. His men felt it before they could name it. Caruso felt it. Petrov felt it. Isabella felt it and said nothing because she had been waiting for it for years. Marco was different. Not softer, that wasn't the right word, and it wasn't accurate. He was still precise, still controlled, still capable of the cold, complete authority that had built and maintained everything around him. But there was something else now running underneath all of it that hadn't been there before. A quality of presence, as if some part of him that had been somewhere else had come home. He made time. That was the simplest way to say it. He made time for things that had no tactical value, sitting with his mother in the evening without an agenda. Calling Danny on Tuesdays for reasons that had nothing to do with monitoring or surveillance, just asking how he was doing and meaning it. Walking through his own house without the quality of a man moving from crisis to crisis, but like a man who was slowly and deliberately learning to live in a place rather than just operate from it. Lena recovered. It took months longer than she wanted, shorter than the doctors predicted, which the surgeon attributed to the same constitutional strength he'd remarked on after the surgery. She was not a patient. She was a precise and methodical patient, which was different. She followed every protocol, asked every question, did every exercise, and pushed exactly to the edge of what was appropriate and not 1 inch over, which drove the recovery team slightly insane and got her back on her feet faster than any of them expected. The first morning, she walked without assistance to the window of the apartment. Her apartment, the top floor, 2 years empty, and now full of morning light and the particular aliveness of a space that belongs to someone. She stood there for a long time looking at Chicago spread out below her. She thought about the small room near the service entrance. She thought about the granola bar breakfasts and the $40 grocery weeks and the 3 sets of clothes and the nursing school acceptance she'd let expire when she was 22 years old, with a teenager's grief and a 9-year-old brother, and the specific impossible weight of being the only one left. She thought about Isabella's hand in hers in the dark of that armored car. She thought about Marco's face when she woke up, the open hands, the rough voice, the 9 days in the chair. She thought about Danny saying, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it wasn't wasted," and meaning every word. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, warm from the morning sun. 5 bullets had not broken her. They had broken open something that had been sealed for 13 years, the door she had locked at 16, and told herself she didn't need to open because there was work to do and people to keep alive and no time for anything that wasn't survival. She was still here. Danny was still here. And for the first time since she was a teenager, standing in a hospital hallway being told her mother was gone, Lena Carter was not just surviving. She was living. Behind her, she heard the door. She didn't turn around. She knew his footsteps by now, the particular weight and pace of them unhurried, certain the walk of a man who has decided where he's going. Marco stopped beside her at the window. He didn't say anything. He looked at the city the way she was looking at it, and she felt the warmth of him standing close and didn't move away. "How do you feel?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. She looked at Chicago, the whole complicated, violent, beautiful, exhausting city, and she thought about everything it had taken to get to this window this morning, this moment. "Like someone who has something to lose," she said, "for the first time in a long time." He turned and looked at her. She turned and looked at him. And the invisible girl, the nobody, the shadow, the expendable staff member that no one had thought worth seeing for 11 months, looked back at him with open eyes and did not look away. 5 bullets hadn't just saved a life, they had returned one. And in the end, that was the truest thing the story had to say, that the woman no one noticed became the reason the most powerful man in Chicago finally learned the difference between controlling a world and being present in it, and that love, when it arrives, does not knock politely. It comes like an ambush in the rain, and it changes everything.